You know, life has a funny way of blindsiding you. One day, you think you've got everything under control: family, career, future plans, and the next day, you're standing in the wreckage of everything you thought was solid. That's pretty much how it went for me. And if I'm being honest, even now, when I sit down and think about the chain of events, it still feels like I'm telling someone else's story, not my own. This isn't just about a marriage falling apart. It's about betrayal, obsession, and the terrifying reality of not knowing who you really married until it's too late. But let me take you back to the beginning. Because if I don't, none of this will make sense. Caitlin and I had been married for 15 years. 15 years. That's a big chunk of anyone's life. When you spend that long with someone, you start to believe they're part of your DNA, woven into every fiber of your existence. We had 2 kids, Susan, 12, and Harry, 9. They were the light of my life. And honestly, a big reason why I stayed in that marriage longer than I should have. On the outside, we looked like your average family. Decent house in a good neighborhood. Me working as a construction foreman. Caitlin mostly managing the household. To neighbors and friends, we probably looked stable, even enviable, and for a long time, I convinced myself that's exactly what we were. But here's the thing about convincing yourself of something: you can only lie to yourself for so long before reality catches up. Caitlin had a temper. And I don't mean she got a little irritated once in a while, like most people do. No. This was a deep-seated, explosive rage that could go from 0 to 100 over the smallest things. If I forgot to grab milk from the grocery store on my way home, she wouldn't just roll her eyes or sigh in frustration. She would erupt. She'd throw whatever was in her hand: a coffee mug, a TV remote, once even a hairbrush that left a crack in the wall. She'd slam doors so hard the frames would rattle. She'd scream until her voice went hoarse, and the neighbors could hear every word. It was the kind of anger that made you feel unsafe, even if you weren't in physical danger. The kids learned quickly that whenever mom's voice got louder, they needed to disappear into their rooms. I hated seeing them tiptoe around their own mother. But at the time, I told myself it was just stress or a rough patch. That was my mistake. I excused behavior that should never have been excused. And then there were the good days. That's what made it all so confusing. Caitlin wasn't always a storm. Sometimes she was sunshine, bright, funny, magnetic. She had this way of drawing people in, making them feel special. When she was in a good mood, she could make me laugh so hard my stomach hurt. She could be charming and affectionate, the kind of partner who made me believe all the bad days were just temporary. But those good days were like sugar highs. Sweet. Addictive. But fleeting. And after the high came the inevitable crash. Work became my escape. I'd tell myself I was putting in extra hours for the money. But really, it was just easier to manage blueprints and schedules than to deal with the minefield at home. At work, problems had solutions. At home, problems just had explosions. Still, I stayed. I stayed because of the kids. I stayed because divorce felt like admitting defeat. I stayed because I thought marriage was supposed to be hard. That this was just part of the deal. But deep down, I think I stayed because I was scared. Scared of starting over. Scared of being alone. Scared of facing the possibility that the person I had built my life with wasn't the person I thought she was. And then came the betrayal. 8 months ago, Caitlin left me. But it wasn't just a clean break. It wasn't just 2 people realizing they weren't meant for each other. No. She left me for someone else. And not just anyone. She left me for my own brother, Connor. Yeah. My brother. The guy I grew up with. The guy I shared bunk beds with as a kid. Who I fought with and made up with. Who I defended in schoolyard fights. Who I trusted more than anyone. That's the man she chose. When I first found out, I honestly thought it was some kind of sick joke. My brain refused to process it. But it was real. And once it sank in, it was like having the ground ripped out from under me. Because betrayal from your spouse is one thing. Betrayal from your brother at the same time? That's devastation on a whole new level. The divorce was brutal. But I tried to keep things civil. For Susan and Harry's sake, I swallowed a lot of anger. I didn't badmouth Caitlin in front of them. Didn't drag them into the ugliness. They were already caught in the middle of something they didn't ask for. And I wasn't going to make it worse. I told myself that once the papers were signed, once the dust settled, we'd all be able to move on. That was naive, because Caitlin wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. It started with phone calls. Dozens of them. At all hours. If I didn't pick up, she'd leave voicemails that swung wildly between rage and sobbing apologies. Then she started showing up at my house. She'd park in the driveway, honking her horn, yelling for me to come outside. Sometimes she'd get out of the car and pound on the front door until my kids were terrified. When I started dating someone new, things escalated. She stalked my girlfriend, followed her to work, showed up at places she knew we liked to go. Once, She even tried to shove her way into our home, screaming about how I had replaced her. That was when I knew this wasn't just bitterness over a divorce. This was obsession. I went to court. Got a restraining order. Thought that would be the end of it. For a while, Caitlin kept her distance, and I let myself believe it was finally over. But then I found her journal, and that's when I realized I had barely scratched the surface of just how far Caitlin had gone. When I think about my marriage to Caitlin, what stands out the most isn't the good memories or the big milestones, it's the moments in between. The arguments that stretched late into the night, the uneasy silence over dinner, the feeling of walking on eggshells in my own home. That was the real texture of our marriage, even if I didn't want to admit it at the time. See, Caitlin wasn't just moody or short-tempered. Her anger was a storm, unpredictable and destructive. It wasn't just about yelling or slamming doors, it was the way she made you feel small. Like everything wrong in her world was somehow your fault. I remember one night in particular. It was a Tuesday, nothing special. I'd gotten home later than usual because a project at the construction site had gone sideways. Concrete delivery was late, one of my guys messed up a measurement, and by the time I clocked out, I was exhausted. All I wanted was to eat, maybe watch a little TV, and go to bed. But when I walked into the house, Caitlin was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, a carton of milk on the counter. "You forgot this," she snapped, as if I'd committed some crime. I tried to explain that the day had been rough, that I'd grab it tomorrow. But it didn't matter. She launched into one of her tirades, how I didn't care about the family, how I was unreliable, how she had to do everything herself. The kids were in the living room, frozen on the couch, staring at the TV but not really watching. I could see Susan's shoulders stiffen every time Caitlin's voice rose. By the time Caitlin stormed off, slamming the bedroom door so hard the picture frames on the wall rattled, I felt like I'd run a marathon. Not physically, but emotionally. Drained, empty, and that wasn't a one-off. That was the pattern. The thing about living with someone like Caitlin is that you start to adapt in unhealthy ways. I learned to anticipate her moods, to adjust my behavior to keep the peace. If I saw the look in her eyes, I'd know tonight's not the night to bring up that bill we need to pay. Or don't mention that you're working late tomorrow. It'll set her off. It was like living with a landmine. One wrong step and everything exploded. And yet, for every outburst, there were moments of tenderness. She'd make my favorite meal out of the blue. She'd curl up next to me on the couch, laughing at some dumb TV show. On those nights, I'd convince myself that this was the real Caitlin, that the anger was just stress or hormones or whatever excuse I could invent. But deep down, I knew better. I think the saddest part is how much the kids noticed. Kids are smart, they pick up on way more than we give them credit for. Susan, especially, started taking on this role of peacemaker. At 12 years old, she'd step in when Caitlin was shouting, trying to calm her down. No child should have to do that. Harry, on the other hand, just shut down. He'd disappear into his room with his video games, headphones on, pretending not to hear. I hated that their childhood was becoming a battlefield. But every time I thought about leaving, I'd look at them and think, no, I can't. They need both of us under one roof. So I stayed. What I didn't realize back then was that staying wasn't protecting them, it was normalizing chaos. It was teaching them that love meant volatility, that family meant tension, and maybe, in some twisted way, I was teaching myself the same thing. Looking back now, I wonder if Caitlin knew exactly how much control she had. Maybe she thrived on it. Or maybe she was just so lost in her own anger that she couldn't see the damage she was causing. Either way, the cracks in our marriage weren't just cracks, they were fractures, spreading wider and deeper every year. And eventually, those fractures split the whole thing apart. The real breaking point came when I started noticing little changes in her behavior. She was on her phone more often, texting late at night. She became secretive about where she was going, brushing me off with vague excuses. At first, I chalked it up to her needing space, but the gut feeling, that nagging instinct that something was wrong, kept gnawing at me, and I was right. When the truth finally came out that she was cheating on me, and not just with anyone but with my brother, Connor, it wasn't a sudden explosion. It was more like the inevitable collapse of a house that had been rotting from the inside for years. I'll get into the details of that betrayal soon, because trust me, it deserves its own chapter. But before we go there, I want to make something clear. The story of Caitlin and me wasn't just about infidelity. It was about years of toxicity, years of denial, and years of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. By the time she left, our marriage was already dead. The affair was just the final nail in the coffin. And yet, somehow, that wasn't the end. Because when Caitlin walked out of my life as my wife, she didn't actually leave my life. If anything, she became more present than ever, just in all the wrong ways. You know, there are moments in life when you can actually feel the air leave your lungs, like someone's punched you straight in the chest. Finding out about Caitlin and Connor, that was one of those moments. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't like Caitlin sat me down and confessed. No. The truth came at me in pieces. Fragments that I kept trying to ignore until they formed a picture I couldn't unsee. The first clue came one evening when Caitlin said she was going out for some fresh air. That wasn't unusual, she'd take drives sometimes when she was angry or restless. But that night, she was gone for hours. I called her, no answer. Texted her, nothing. By the time she walked back in, it was nearly midnight. I asked her where she'd been. She brushed me off, said she just needed space. She smelled faintly of cologne, not mine. I let it go. Or at least, I pretended to. Then there were the phone calls. I'd walk into the room and she'd quickly put her phone face down, like a kid hiding candy before dinner. She'd laugh at messages, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in years. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd get defensive. And Connor, he started acting different too. At first, I didn't connect the dots. He'd show up at family gatherings with excuses for why he couldn't stay long. He avoided eye contact with me, he stopped calling as often. It was Susan who unknowingly tipped me off. One afternoon, she mentioned, "Mommy and Uncle Connor were talking a lot on the phone yesterday." She said it so casually, like it was no big deal. To her, it wasn't. To me, it was like someone flipped on a light in a dark room. I wish I could tell you I confronted Caitlin right then and there. But I didn't. I pushed the thought away, because the alternative that my wife was cheating on me with my brother was too grotesque to believe. But denial only lasts so long. The truth finally came out one Saturday night. I'd gone to visit Connor at his place, something I hadn't done in a while. He wasn't expecting me. When he opened the door, the look on his face told me everything before I even stepped inside. And then I saw it. Her jacket. Hanging on the back of his chair. I remember standing there, frozen, while Connor stammered something about explaining. My ears were ringing, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break my ribs. Caitlin appeared in the hallway a moment later, barefoot, hair messy, wearing one of Connor's shirts. That image is burned into my memory. A picture I never asked for but can never erase. The fight that followed wasn't physical, not at first. It was shouting, raw and loud. I demanded answers, they gave me excuses. Words like, "We didn't mean for this to happen," and "you have to understand" filled the room, but none of it mattered. What was there to understand? That my wife of 15 years had been lying to me? That my brother had been sneaking behind my back, betraying not only me but his own family? I left that night feeling hollow, like someone had scooped out my insides. The days after were a blur. Caitlin moved in with Connor almost immediately, as if she'd been planning it for weeks. Our divorce proceedings started soon after. She didn't fight much over the house or the finances, which told me her priorities were elsewhere. I tried to keep it together for the kids. Susan asked why Mommy wasn't living with us anymore, and I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Harry just withdrew further, spending hours in his room. I wanted to shield them from the ugliness. But how do you protect kids from something that cuts right through the family tree? People talk about heartbreak like it's just emotional pain. But for me, it was physical too. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus at work. I'd be in the middle of giving instructions to my crew, and suddenly my throat would close up, my chest tight. I'd have to walk away just to breathe. And then came the humiliation. Word spreads fast in families, in neighborhoods, in communities. I could feel the pity in people's eyes. Hear the whispers. His wife left him, for his own brother. It's the kind of scandal that makes you want to disappear. Here's the part that really messed me up though. Even after she left me, Caitlin wasn't gone. She called constantly. Not to apologize, but to rant. She'd accuse me of moving on too quickly, of replacing her. It was insane she had chosen Connor, and yet she acted like I had betrayed her. I tried blocking her number. She found new ways to reach me. I tried ignoring her at drop-offs with the kids. She'd scream in the driveway until the neighbors peeked out their windows. It was clear Caitlin wasn't finished with me. She wanted control, even if she no longer wanted the marriage. And I hadn't even found her journal yet. That, as I would later learn, was the key to understanding just how far her obsession would go. Divorce is supposed to be an ending. That's what I told myself when I signed the papers, sitting across from Caitlin in that cold, sterile office, with nothing but a mediator between us. I thought that once ink hit paper, it would all be over: the yelling, the betrayals, the constant tension. But I was wrong. For Caitlin, the divorce wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning of something darker. At first, it started small. A text here, a call there. She'd message me late at night with things like, "Are you really happy without me? Or you'll regret this one day." Sometimes she'd swing the other way, sending long paragraphs apologizing, saying she missed our family, that we could try again. It was whiplash rage one day, tears the next. I ignored most of it. What else could I do? We were done. She was living with Connor now. I told myself that she'd eventually get bored, that she'd settle into her new life, and the storm would finally pass. But storms don't just vanish. Sometimes, they grow. Then came the phone calls. Not just once or twice, but dozens of times a day. If I blocked one number, she'd call from another. My phone became a grenade in my pocket, buzzing and vibrating at all hours. She left voicemails too. Some were venomous, screaming about how I was a coward for moving on, how I was ruining the kids' lives. Others were eerily calm. Like she was just chatting with an old friend, reminiscing about vacations we took years ago, talking as if nothing had changed. It was unsettling, to say the least. When I started seeing someone new, that's when everything escalated. Her name was Emily. She was kind, steady, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. But Caitlin couldn't stand it. She started showing up at places she knew Emily and I liked to go. Once, we were at a coffee shop downtown, and there Caitlin was sitting at a table by the window, glaring at us over her cup. Another time, Emily caught her car following us home. The worst was the night Caitlin tried to force her way into my house. Emily and I were watching a movie with the kids when the banging started on the front door. Caitlin's voice cut through the walls, screaming, demanding to be let in. Susan burst into tears. Harry ran upstairs. Emily froze, her face pale. I called the police. By the time they arrived, Caitlin was gone. That was the night I knew this wasn't just bitterness. It was obsession. I went to court and filed for a restraining order. I thought that would solve it, that a legal boundary would finally keep her away. And for a little while, it seemed to work. She stopped calling, stopped showing up. The silence was almost eerie, but I welcomed it. I told myself it was over. But Caitlin, she wasn't done, because one day, while I was packing away some old boxes in the garage, I stumbled on something that made my blood run cold. Her journal. And in those pages, I discovered that everything I had experienced, the calls, the stalking, the anger, was only the surface. Beneath it was something far more twisted, far more dangerous than I ever imagined. It's strange how life-changing discoveries don't always happen in grand, dramatic ways. Sometimes, they come when you're doing something as ordinary as cleaning out the garage. That day, I wasn't looking for answers. I wasn't even thinking about Caitlin. I was just trying to clear some space, moving old boxes stacked up against the wall, holiday decorations, kids' art projects, tools I hadn't touched in years. And then I saw it. A plain leather-bound notebook tucked into the corner of a box labeled, "Winter Clothes." At first, I thought it was mine. I used to jot down work notes, sketches, measurements, stuff for construction projects. But when I flipped it open, the handwriting stopped me cold. It was hers. Caitlin's. The first page looked innocent enough. Dates, little scribbles about her day. But the further I read, the darker it got. She wrote about me. About Emily. About the kids. Not in a reflective diary kind of way. No. These entries were detailed, obsessive. He thinks he can leave me. He doesn't get it, I'm still his wife. No one else will ever have him, not really. Help you for his God. Another entry. Saw him with her again today. She's nothing. Cheap, replaceable. He'll come back once he realizes she's not me. The words were underlined. The pen marks pressed so hard into the page they nearly tore the paper. As I turned the pages, I started to feel sick. This wasn't just venting or anger, it was plotting. She wrote about following Emily to work, describing the route she took, where she parked, even what time she usually left the office. She wrote about our kids too, in ways that made my skin crawl. Susan is too much like him. Always questioning, always doubting me. I need to fix that. Harry doesn't see it yet. He's still mine. I'll make sure he stays on my side. It was like peering straight into her mind. And what I saw wasn't just bitterness, it was obsession laced with malice. One entry in particular froze me. If I can't have him, no one will. Better to burn it all down than let someone else take what's mine. I sat there in the garage, the journal open on my lap, my hands trembling. All the late night calls, the stalking, the banging on my door, it all suddenly made sense. She wasn't just lashing out, she was escalating. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. It was about control. Ownership. And the terrifying part was I didn't know how far she was willing to go. I thought about Emily. About how Caitlin had already followed her, intimidated her. What if it didn't stop at intimidation? What if she acted on those words? I thought about my kids. About Susan, who was already pulling away from her mother. About Harry, who still clung to her in his own way. If Caitlin saw the kids as pawns in her game, how safe were they really? I knew then that the restraining order wasn't enough. A piece of paper couldn't protect us from someone who had already crossed so many lines in her mind. I put the journal in a locked drawer in my bedroom. Part of me wanted to take it straight to the police, to shove it across the desk and say, "Look. This is proof. Do something." But another part of me hesitated. Because what if they didn't take it seriously? What if they brushed it off as just words in a diary? Then Caitlin would know I had read it, and she would become even more unpredictable. So, for the moment, I kept it to myself. But every night, when the house got quiet, I'd pull it out and read more. I couldn't stop. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. You don't want to see it, but you can't look away. And the deeper I went, the more I realized. Caitlin wasn't just dangerous. She was unraveling. And if I didn't act soon, the people I loved most might pay the price. Reading Caitlin's journal had already unsettled me. But I told myself maybe it was just venting. Maybe writing those dark thoughts down was her way of processing them. A twisted kind of therapy. But then the incident started. And I realized the journal wasn't just a collection of thoughts, it was a blueprint. The first sign came one afternoon when Emily was leaving work. She called me, her voice shaking, telling me her car tires had been slashed in the parking lot. The security guard shrugged, said it could have been kids messing around. But when Emily opened her car door, there was an envelope taped to the steering wheel. Inside was a single page ripped from a notebook. Handwritten, in Caitlin's jagged scrawl. She doesn't belong. Get rid of her before it's too late. Emily was terrified. I wanted to call the police right then, but she begged me not to. She didn't want to escalate things. Didn't want to drag my kids into more drama. So instead, I kept it quiet. But in my gut, I knew exactly who had done it. Not long after, Susan came home from school with a story that made my blood run cold. She said Caitlin had shown up outside the building, waiting near the gate. At first Susan thought it was just a normal pickup. But Caitlin didn't come for Harry. She came for her. She told me I shouldn't listen to you anymore. Susan whispered, her eyes wide. She said you're trying to turn me against her. She said I'd regret it if I didn't take her side. I pulled Susan into a hug, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. No 12-year-old should be put in that position. And as soon as Susan was asleep, I pulled out the journal again. Flipped to an entry I remembered. Susan thinks she's too smart, too much like him. If she won't listen, I'll make her. One way or another. He welcome to the place fad. Where? And then subvist in a randing. The words stared back at me like a threat carved in stone. It didn't stop there. A few days later, Harry mentioned something odd. He said Caitlin had told him that if he ever wanted to live with her full time, she'd make it happen. At first, I thought it was just a desperate attempt to win him over. But then I read another line in the journal. Harry is still mine. I'll take him back, even if I have to break the law to do it. That was when the fear turned into something else, paranoia. Every knock on the door, every unfamiliar car parked on the street, every shadow outside the window at night. I thought it was her. Watching. Waiting. And then, one night, it wasn't just paranoia. Emily and I were asleep when a noise jolted me awake. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. But then I heard it again scraping. Like metal against glass. I grabbed a flashlight and crept downstairs. My stomach dropped when I saw the kitchen window. The lock was jiggling. The glass rattling. Someone was trying to pry it open. I shouted, and the noise stopped. By the time I ran outside, the yard was empty. But in the dirt under the window, I found footprints. Small enough to be a woman's. The next morning, taped to my front door, was another note. You can lock the doors, but you can't lock me out. That was the moment I realized Caitlin's obsession wasn't going to fade. If anything, it was accelerating. And the journal, the one I had hidden in my drawer, wasn't just a warning. It was a prophecy. The woman I had once loved, the mother of my children, was now a threat. Not just to me, but to everyone I cared about. And I had no idea how far she was willing to go. After the night I caught someone trying to force the window open, I couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me overthinking. It was real, and it was dangerous. The next morning, I took the journal. The threatening notes. Even photos of the footprints outside the house. And I went straight to the police station. The officer at the front desk listened politely as I laid everything out. He flipped through the journal, frowning at the underlined words. The threats. He examined the notes Caitlin had left on my door and Emily's car. This is serious, he finally said. But it's complicated. Complicated. That was the word they kept using. Because Caitlin hadn't been caught in the act. And because the journal technically wasn't proof of a crime, just private thoughts. It was not out the crude, and he was not too cowarded. I pushed back, reminding him about the restraining order, the window break-in, the harassment. The officer sighed, then agreed to file an official report and said they'd keep an eye on things. But I could tell from his tone that to him, this was just another messy divorce drama. Nothing urgent. For a few weeks, Caitlin seemed to disappear again. No late-night calls, no notes, no sudden appearances. Emily even started to relax. and the kids seemed lighter, less tense. But I didn't trust the silence. And I was right not to. It started with small things. I'd come home and noticed the mailbox left open, the gate unlocked. Little details that felt off but weren't enough to prove anything. Then one evening, Susan swore she saw Caitlin's car parked across the street from the school. She didn't approach, didn't cause a scene, just sat there, staring. By the time I arrived, the car was gone. Harry mentioned, in passing, that Mommy said she'd see him soon. I asked him when she said that. He shrugged, said it was at recess. My chest tightened. She had been at the school. I went back to the police with this new information, but without photos or witnesses, it was my word against hers. They reminded me that Caitlin still had visitation rights. That unless she directly harmed someone, their hands were tied. It was infuriating. The law was supposed to protect us, but it felt like Caitlin was always one step ahead, dancing just inside the boundaries of legality. Emily tried to be supportive, but I could see the toll it was taking on her. She jumped at small noises. She started double-checking the locks before bed, leaving lights on in the hallways. One night, after putting the kids to bed, she sat next to me on the couch and whispered, "I can't live like this, always waiting for her to show up. What if she does something to the kids? What if she comes after me when you're not here?" I didn't have an answer. Because the truth was, I was asking myself the same questions every single day. And then, just when I thought Caitlin couldn't sink any lower, she proved me wrong. One Friday evening, when I went to pick up the kids from her scheduled visit, they weren't there. Her house was dark. Her car was gone. No one answered the phone. My heart dropped into my stomach. Panic set in. It took hours, agonizing hours, before she finally called. Calm as anything, she said she'd decided to take the kids on a little trip and that I shouldn't worry. A trip. Without telling me, without permission, without any warning. That was when I realized, Caitlin wasn't just harassing me anymore. She was using the kids as leverage. And that terrified me more than anything else. When Caitlin finally called that night, I was equal parts relieved and furious. Relieved because at least I knew the kids were alive. Furious because she had no right, no warning, no discussion, nothing, just gone. I demanded to know where she was. She laughed, that same mocking laugh she used to use during our worst fights. "Relax," she said. "They're with their mother. They're safe. You should thank me, I'm giving them a real family experience. Something you never could." There would have made a 10 take with a never. I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles ached. "Caitlin, this isn't a game. You're violating the custody agreement. Bring them back now." But she hung up. The next 48 hours were some of the longest of my life. I called the police, of course. Filed a report. But again, the word came back. Complicated. Because Caitlin was still their mother, technically she wasn't kidnapping them, she was just extending visitation. The officers said unless she refused to return them for more than a week, there wasn't much they could do. A week? The thought of waiting that long while my children were, who knows where, made me sick. I didn't sleep that night. Every worst-case scenario played in my head. Was she driving recklessly? Drinking? Filling their heads with poison about me? Worse? Susan was old enough to know something was wrong. She'd see through Caitlin's games. But Harry, he was still young, still trusting. What if Caitlin twisted that trust, used it to turn him against me? I kept picturing his face, his small hands gripping hers, believing every word she said. Finally, on Sunday afternoon, Caitlin returned. No explanation, no apology. Just pulled up in her car, the kids spilling out with backpacks and tired eyes. Susan wouldn't look at me. Harry was quiet, withdrawn. When I asked what happened, Susan muttered. She said we were on vacation. But it wasn't fun. That was all she'd say. Harry didn't speak at all. I crouched down, tried to meet their eyes, reassure them. But inside, I was boiling, because I knew this wasn't the end. It was a test. Caitlin was seeing how far she could push before anyone stopped her, and if the law wouldn't protect my kids, then I would have to. That night, after they were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with the journal in front of me. My hands shook as I flipped through more pages, hoping, praying that what I read wouldn't confirm my fears. But then I found it. An entry dated just a week earlier. He thinks he's in control. He thinks the court will save him. But the kids are mine. I carried them. I raised them. If I want to take them away, I will. He can't stop me. No one can. The words burned into my brain. Caitlin wasn't just lashing out anymore. She was planning. And the kids were her weapons. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my own safety, or Emily's. I was fighting for my children's lives, whether they knew it or not. After that vacation stunt, I knew I couldn't just wait for the next incident. Caitlin had crossed a line, and if I didn't do something fast, she'd cross it again, and maybe this time, there'd be no coming back. So, I called a lawyer. Walking into his office felt surreal. I'd never been the kind of guy who thought I'd end up in custody battles. I wanted a normal family, stability for my kids, but as I laid everything out, the journal, the notes, the break-in attempt, and now the disappearing act, the lawyer leaned back in his chair, his face grim. "This is serious," he said. "But I won't lie to you, it's going to be tough. Courts don't like taking custody away from a mother, no matter how messy things get. Unless we can prove she's a danger, it'll be an uphill battle." I nodded, even though the words hit me like a punch to the gut. Uphill battle or not, I had no choice. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and evidence gathering. I documented everything. Every strange phone call. Every sighting near the kids' school. Every time Caitlin bent or broke the visitation schedule. Emily helped me build the file, staying up late with me to organize it all. But I could see the fear in her eyes. Each time she tucked the kids into bed, she'd linger a little longer at the door, double-check the locks, peek out the window before turning in. She didn't say it outright, but I knew what she was thinking. What if Caitlin snaps before the court date even arrives? And honestly, I was thinking the same thing, because Caitlin wasn't sitting quietly while I built my case. She fought back. It started with emails. Dozens of them, filled with accusations. That I was poisoning the kids against her. That Emily was an unfit influence. That I was trying to erase her from their lives. She sent the same rants to the court, to the school, even to my boss. When that didn't work, she escalated. She started showing up at random places, my work site, the grocery store, even outside Emily's office, never saying anything, just standing there, watching, like she wanted me to know she was always nearby, always in the background. And then, one night, Susan came to me with tears in her eyes. She handed me a crumpled note. She said Caitlin had slipped into her backpack at school. "Daddy wants to take you away from me. But I won't let him. You're mine. Don't trust him. Don't trust her. You belong with me. Thanks for watching." And it isn't a non-writing. I stared at those words, my chest aching, knowing exactly what Caitlin was trying to do. She wasn't just threatening anymore. She was waging psychological war on me, on Emily, and worst of all, on the kids. When I showed the note to my lawyer, he pressed his lips together and said, "This is exactly the kind of evidence we need. But keep in mind, things usually get worse before they get better." Worse. The word echoed in my head, and sure enough, he was right. Because just as I was preparing to fight for full custody, Caitlin made her boldest move yet. The custody battle was moving forward, but slowly. Court dates were set. Evaluations scheduled. My lawyer warned me that this process could drag on for months. Months I didn't feel like I had, because Caitlin wasn't waiting around. She was escalating. It happened on a Thursday evening. Emily had taken the kids to soccer practice while I finished up at work. When I got home, the house felt off. Nothing was broken. Nothing was missing. But the air felt heavy. Charged. And then I noticed it. The faint smell of perfume. A scent I knew too well. Caitlin's. My heart thudded as I walked through the house. And that's when I saw it, sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. One of Susan's stuffed animals. The one she always kept in her room, but Susan hadn't been home yet. Someone had been inside. When Emily pulled into the driveway with the kids, I rushed out, forcing a smile so they wouldn't see the panic in my eyes. I whispered to Emily to stay calm, then quietly told her what I'd found. Her face drained of color. "She was here?" I nodded. That night, I filed another police report. This time, I didn't just hand over notes and journal pages, I told them flat out. She broke into my home. The officers came, looked around, jotted things down. But without signs of forced entry, they hesitated. Maybe I'd left the door unlocked, they suggested. Maybe the stuffed animal had just been misplaced. I wanted to scream. How many warnings did they need? The very next day, Caitlin proved me right. Emily had driven the kids to school, and as they were walking toward the building, Caitlin appeared out of nowhere. She didn't look disheveled or angry this time. She looked calm, almost smug. She walked straight up to Harry, grabbed his hand, and started pulling him toward her car. Emily shouted, rushing forward, yanking him back. Teachers nearby ran to intervene. Harry burst into tears, clinging to Emily, while Caitlin shouted about how she was his real mother, and that I was poisoning him. He's May Tenchery. The police were called. This time, there were witnesses. When I arrived, my son was still crying. Emily was shaking, and Caitlin was in handcuffs. For the first time, the officers looked at me with genuine seriousness. One of them said quietly, "We'll be contacting Child Protective Services. This isn't just a domestic dispute anymore." That night, I sat at the edge of my bed, the journal open in my lap. I reread one line over and over. "If I can't have them, no one will." It had felt like a metaphor before. But after what happened outside that school, it felt like a promise. And I realized something terrifying. The restraining order, the court, even the police, they weren't enough. Caitlin had crossed a line. And once someone crosses that kind of line, there's no telling how far they'll go. After the scene at the school, things finally shifted. The police, the court, even Child Protective Services, they couldn't dismiss Caitlin's behavior anymore. She had tried to physically take Harry in broad daylight, in front of teachers and parents. There were witnesses. There was no complicated excuse left. But knowing the system was finally paying attention didn't ease my fear. If anything, it made me more anxious. Because Caitlin had been reckless enough to try that in public, what would she do now that the spotlight was on her? That night, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee that had long gone cold. Planning like generals preparing for battle. Security cameras, Emily said firmly. Around the house, front and back. Motion lights too. Done. I agreed. And the kids? Maybe we should pull them out of extracurriculars for now. Keep them close. Keep them safe. I hated the thought of Susan and Harry losing pieces of their childhood because of Caitlin's obsession. But she was right. Their safety came first. We even talked about changing our routines, different driving routes, varying pickup times, anything to make it harder for Caitlin to predict where we'd be. It felt surreal, like we weren't living a normal life anymore. We weren't a family, we were a target under siege. The kids noticed, of course. Susan was old enough to understand. She watched us install cameras and locks with wide, worried eyes. Harry just asked, "Is Mommy coming back?" I didn't know how to answer him. Meanwhile, my lawyer called with news. The court had granted an emergency hearing. Given Caitlin's latest stunt, they were now considering a suspension of her visitation rights. It was the break I'd been waiting for, but it came with risks. Caitlin wouldn't take the decision quietly. Sure enough, the backlash came swiftly. She started blowing up my phone with messages, not the pleading or manipulative ones this time, pure venom. "You can't erase me. The kids are mine. If you think a piece of paper will stop me, you're wrong." Each message was like a dagger in my gut, but I saved them all. Evidence. Every word she sent was another nail in her legal coffin. Still, the legal battle was slow, and Caitlin wasn't slowing down. One night, after I tucked Harry into bed, I heard a faint tapping sound on his window. My heart froze. When I rushed outside, the street was empty, but the roses planted under his window had been crushed, as if someone had stood there recently. And on the glass itself, faint but unmistakable, was the oily smear of a handprint. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was a siege. Caitlin wasn't giving up. She was escalating. And as I stared at that handprint glowing faintly under the porch light, I realized something chilling. Caitlin didn't see herself as losing. She saw herself as preparing for war. The courthouse smelled of old paper and floor polish, a mix that somehow made my stomach churn worse than the strongest alcohol. This wasn't just another day of filing reports or installing cameras. This was a day where someone with real authority would finally decide if Caitlin's grip on our children would be loosened. Emily squeezed my hand as we sat down. She tried to look calm, but I could feel the tension in her grip, like she was bracing for impact. When Caitlin walked in, it was like the air changed. She didn't look like the woman who had tried to drag Harry across a parking lot. She didn't look like the furious figure who sent venomous texts at midnight. She looked polished. Hair neatly done. Modest blouse. A folder tucked under one arm. And when she sat down at her table, she smiled at me. A slow, confident smile, like she already knew she had won. The judge called the session to order, and my lawyer began presenting our case. He laid it out carefully. The journal entries, the police reports, the break-in, the note Caitlin had slipped into Susan's backpack, and finally, the attempted abduction at the school. I could see the judge's eyebrows furrow with each new piece of evidence. For the first time, I thought maybe this is it. Maybe someone finally understands. Then Caitlin spoke. If I hadn't known her, if I hadn't lived through the chaos, I might have believed her. She stood there with tears welling in her eyes, her voice soft, trembling just enough to sound genuine. "Your Honor, I'm a mother who made mistakes, yes. But I am being painted as a monster because my ex-husband wants to erase me from my children's lives. He's poisoning them against me. He's using his new girlfriend to replace me. I was desperate. I acted out of fear of losing my babies. But I am not a danger to them. I love them. I will always love them." Her attorney handed over photos, pictures of Caitlin with the kids at birthday parties, school plays, vacations from years ago. Smiling faces. Happy moments. A version of her that had once been real, but was long gone. And for a terrifying moment, I saw the judge soften. Rage burned in me. I wanted to stand up, to shout, to tell everyone in that room that this was all an act. But my lawyer pressed his hand to my arm. A silent warning. Don't. Let her unravel herself, and she did. Because as the hearing went on, Caitlin couldn't keep the mask in place. When the judge questioned her about the incident at the school, her answers slipped from, "I just wanted to hug my son," to "He belongs with me," to "No one can keep him from me." Her voice rose, tears turned to snarls, and that polished exterior cracked wide open for everyone to see. The judge's gavel came down hard. Temporary custody was awarded solely to me. Caitlin's visitation rights were suspended, pending a full evaluation. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Emily squeezed my hand again, this time with relief flooding her grip, but as Caitlin was escorted out, she looked back at me, and her smile was gone. In its place was something else. A promise. The court's decision should have felt like victory. Temporary full custody. No more scheduled visits. No more forced handoffs where I had to watch Caitlin's eyes linger on the kids, like they were possessions instead of people. But victory didn't feel like relief. It felt like poking a sleeping bear. The very next day, Caitlin made sure I knew she wasn't finished. When I came out of work, my truck's windshield had been smeared with red lipstick. Scrawled across the glass were 3 words, written in big, jagged strokes. "You stole them." My coworkers stood awkwardly nearby, whispering, pretending not to see while I scrubbed at the glass with shaking hands. That night, I installed more cameras. Every corner of the house, every blind spot in the yard. Emily thought it was overkill. But I reminded her. She's angry, and she has nothing left to lose. The cameras made us feel a little safer, until the first alert came through. At 2:17 a.m. motion detected. I opened the app and froze. Caitlin stood in the driveway, head tilted back, staring straight at the camera. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't try to get in. She just stood there for 7 minutes. Then she walked away. The next morning, Susan was pale and quiet at breakfast. She finally whispered, "Daddy. I dreamed Mommy was outside." I didn't have the heart to tell her it wasn't a dream. My lawyer advised me to keep reporting everything. The police came again, took down statements, nodded sympathetically. But Caitlin knew how to walk the line, show up, make her presence known, then leave before she could be arrested. It was harassment without technically being a crime. But the real breaking point came the following weekend. Emily had taken Harry to buy school supplies while Susan and I stayed home. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually felt peaceful, until I noticed the front door was unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it. Positive. And then I saw it on the living room table, a Polaroid photo, me, asleep in bed. Taken from inside the house. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold. Caitlin hadn't just been outside anymore. She had been inside, watching. That was when I realized the court's ruling hadn't protected us. If anything, it had cornered her. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous of all. After finding that Polaroid, something inside me shifted. Fear was no longer an abstract feeling. It was a presence. A shadow that followed me through every room of my own home. Emily insisted we call the police immediately. When the officer arrived and held the photo in his gloved hand, his expression hardened. "This isn't just harassment anymore," he said. "This is breaking and entering, and it's escalation." Finally. Someone in authority said the word I'd been living with for months. Escalation. The police agreed to increase patrols around our neighborhood. They even assigned a detective to our case, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Alvarez. She listened carefully, took notes, and told me something chilling. Men like your brother, women like Caitlin, when they lose control, they don't usually back down, they double down. You need to prepare for that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, wondering what double down would look like for Caitlin. I didn't have to wait long to find out. 2 days later, Susan came home from school with a folded piece of paper tucked into her backpack. She handed it to me with trembling hands. It was another photo. This time, of the 4 of us, me, Emily, Susan, and Harry standing in our driveway. Taken just days ago. On the back, scrawled in black marker were the words, "Family is forever. Mine, not yours." Susan burst into tears the moment I read it. Harry clung to Emily's leg, asking, "Is Mommy coming back for us?" Emily and I locked eyes, both of us shaken to the core. Caitlin wasn't just stalking me anymore, she was dragging the kids into her twisted game. We handed the photo straight to Detective Alvarez. She nodded grimly. "This is obsession turning into fixation," she said. "She's trying to remind you she's always close. Too close." That night, another camera alert woke me. 3:41 a.m. This time, it wasn't Caitlin, it was her car. Parked at the end of the street, headlights off. She sat in the driver's seat for almost an hour, unmoving. Watching, waiting. Emily whispered. "She's planning something, isn't she?" I didn't answer. Because deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't just about visitation, or jealousy, or even revenge anymore. Caitlin was circling us like a predator, and predators only circle before they strike. For weeks, Caitlin's presence had been a shadow on the edges of our lives, notes, photos, silent appearances in the night. But shadows, no matter how terrifying, were still just that. Things you could tell yourself weren't real if you closed the blinds and locked the doors. That illusion shattered one Saturday evening. Emily had taken Susan to a friend's birthday party. Harry and I stayed home, enjoying a quiet night with popcorn and cartoons. It was the first time in a long while I'd let my guard down. Just a little. Around 8 p.m. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw no one. Then came the sound, the back door rattling. My blood ran cold. I grabbed Harry, whispering for him to hide in the hallway closet, and reached for the baseball bat I kept under the couch. The rattling stopped, and for a moment, silence pressed in around the house. Then glass shattered in the kitchen. Caitlin. She climbed through the broken window, her face lit by the streetlight outside. Her hair was wild, her clothes disheveled, and in her hand, unbelievably, she held a knife. "Where are they?" she hissed. "Where are my babies?" Every instinct screamed at me to protect Harry, to keep her away from him. "Caitlin, stop. The kids aren't here." I lied, trying to draw her attention away from the closet where Harry was hiding. Her eyes darted around the room, frantic and furious. "You think you can steal them from me? Replace me with her," she shrieked, slamming the knife against the counter. The blade left a deep gouge in the wood. I backed away slowly, keeping my voice calm, even as adrenaline roared through my veins. "Caitlin, put the knife down. This isn't the way. You'll ruin everything if you aren't." But she wasn't listening. She lunged. I swung the bat instinctively. It connected with her arm, sending the knife clattering across the floor. She screamed, not from pain but from rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. And that scream must have carried outside, because a neighbor called the police. By the time the sirens wailed in the distance, Caitlin was on her knees, sobbing, clutching her arm. "Why won't you just let me have them?" she cried. "They're mine. They'll always be mine." The officers stormed in, pulling her away as she kicked and screamed. Harry emerged from the closet, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. He ran to me, burying his head against my chest. "Daddy." "I heard her," he whispered. "She said we're hers. But we're not. Right? We're yours?" My throat tightened. "Yes, buddy," I said, holding him close. "You're mine. And I'll never let her take you away." That night marked the end of Caitlin's shadows. She wasn't lurking on the edges anymore. She had stepped fully into the light, revealing just how dangerous she had become. And though the police had her now, I couldn't shake the thought that even behind bars, her obsession wouldn't end. Because Caitlin hadn't been fighting for custody. She had been fighting for possession. The night Caitlin broke into my home replayed in my head like a movie stuck on repeat. The shattering glass, the knife glinting under the kitchen light, Harry's terrified whisper from inside the closet. Even after the police hauled her away, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a crime scene. Detective Alvarez stayed late that night, walking through every room, snapping photos, bagging the knife as evidence. She spoke to me in that calm, measured tone detectives use when they know their words might be the only thing holding you together. "You did the right thing," she said. "You protected your son. And now we have enough to make this stick." Her words should have been comforting. But all I felt was exhaustion. Emily came home with Susan to find police lights flashing across the front yard. Susan clutched her stuffed rabbit, wide-eyed, as officers explained what happened. Emily pulled Harry into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "This was the line," she whispered to me later, after the kids were in bed. "She crossed it. There's no going back now. The way wait his while costed always now attend that. The way with that no." In the days that followed, the legal process moved fast. Caitlin was charged with breaking and entering, trespassing, and assault with a deadly weapon. My lawyer filed for an emergency hearing to strip her of all custody rights permanently. On paper, it looked like the nightmare was over, but reality didn't match the paperwork. Susan refused to sleep in her room. Every night, she dragged her blanket into the living room and curled up on the couch, whispering that she was afraid Mommy would come back through the window. Harry jumped at every creak of the house, asking me again and again, "Are we safe? Are you sure?" And Emily, strong, steady Emily, wasn't the same either. She flinched whenever a car slowed outside the house. She triple-checked the locks before bed, then lay awake staring at the ceiling. The truth was, Caitlin hadn't just broken into our home, she'd broken into our peace. The journal I'd found weeks earlier sat in a box on my nightstand, sealed away but never far from my mind. Part of me wanted to burn it, to erase her words from existence. But another part of me couldn't, because the journal wasn't just evidence, it was a reminder of how deep her obsession ran. And I needed that reminder. The first court date after the attack was brutal. Caitlin appeared in shackles, her face pale but her eyes still burning with that same unyielding fire. When the judge read out the charges, she laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that echoed through the courtroom. And then, in a voice low enough that only I could hear, she said, "Bars won't keep me away forever." I walked out of that courtroom with the weight of her words pressing down on me. Yes, she was behind bars for now. Yes, the law was finally on my side. But obsession doesn't end with an arrest. And deep down, I knew Caitlin's story in our lives wasn't finished. The hearing to terminate Caitlin's parental rights was scheduled 2 weeks after the attack. 2 weeks, such a short span on a calendar. But in that time, it felt like my family aged years. The kids weren't the same. Susan, once bubbly and curious, walked around the house like a shadow. She wouldn't go upstairs alone. At night, she whispered to me, "Daddy, what if she comes back?" Harry clung to Emily so tightly that she could barely move from room to room without him latched onto her side. He'd started drawing strange pictures in school, dark scribbles of houses with broken windows, stick figures with angry faces. The teachers noticed. The school counselor reached out. Trauma had etched itself into their young lives, and I couldn't help but wonder, what if the damage she caused lasts forever? The morning of the hearing, the courthouse felt different this time. No shouting, no drama like before. Just a heavy, expectant silence. Caitlin was escorted in by 2 deputies. Her wrists were cuffed, her hair unkempt, her eyes bloodshot. But she still carried herself with defiance, like the world owed her something. The judge reviewed the police reports, the evidence, the photographs of broken glass and bloodied countertops. He read through the transcripts of Caitlin's previous threats, and then he asked if she had anything to say. Caitlin smiled. "You can try to erase me from their lives," she said. "But you'll never erase me from their hearts. I'm their mother. You can't change that." For a moment, silence hung in the room. Then the judge delivered his ruling. Parental rights terminated, effective immediately. Caitlin's face drained of color. For the first time in this entire nightmare, I saw something crack in her: shock, disbelief, the realization that she no longer held legal claim to the children she'd once called hers. She screamed, lunging forward before the deputies dragged her away. Her voice echoed down the hall. "This isn't over. You can't take them from me." Legally, it was over. But emotionally, for us, it was only beginning. That night, Emily and I sat the kids down. I explained as gently as I could that Mommy wouldn't be able to see them anymore. That the judge decided it was safest for everyone. Susan just nodded, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Harry asked, "Does that mean she can't hurt us now?" I hesitated before answering. "Yes," I said, forcing conviction into my voice. "She can't hurt us now." But inside, I wasn't sure if I believed it. Because Caitlin's presence lingered not just in our fears, but in our dreams, in our habits, in the way we looked over our shoulders walking through the grocery store. She was gone in body, but her shadow was still here. And shadows are hard to chase away. After the court stripped Caitlin of her parental rights, there was a strange quiet that settled over our lives. It wasn't peace, at least not yet. It was the silence after a storm. The kind where the air still smells of rain, and you know the ground is fragile beneath your feet. Emily suggested we start therapy as a family. At first, I resisted. I thought I could shoulder the burden myself, protect the kids with love and patience. But it quickly became clear love wasn't enough. Susan woke almost every night, crying from nightmares she couldn't put into words. Harry had begun hiding food in his room, as if preparing for something bad to happen again. And Emily? She carried her fear quietly, but I could see it in the way her hands shook when she locked the doors. In the way she scanned parking lots before getting out of the car. So, we went. The therapist's office was warm and calm, decorated with soft colors and shelves of picture books. She encouraged Susan to draw her feelings, and Harry to use toys to act out his fears. One day, Harry lined up toy police cars in front of a dollhouse. "This is our house," he said. "And these cars keep the bad people out." The therapist nodded gently. "And do you feel safe when the cars are there?" Harry shrugged. "Safer. But she always finds a way in." Not I like to say them something of Oprisen Sponnet. I would for that knew him said backly. Hearing that nearly broke me. For Susan, healing came slower. She drew pictures of herself holding hands with 2 stick figures, me and Emily, while a shadow hovered nearby. "That's Mommy," she explained once. "She's not here, but she is." The therapist didn't correct her. She just let Susan's truth exist in the room. Emily and I had our own sessions. For her, the fear wasn't just about Caitlin. It was about vulnerability. About realizing how fragile safety could be. For me, it was guilt. Guilt for bringing Caitlin into my life in the first place. Guilt for not seeing the danger sooner. Guilt for every scar, visible or invisible, she left on my kids. The therapist told me, You can't erase the past. But you can show them that the future is different. At home, little by little, we tried to reclaim our space. I replaced the broken window. We painted the living room a brighter color. Emily bought new curtains, Susan picked out a soft rug for her room, and Harry asked for glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. Each change was small, but together, they felt like taking back control. Still, some nights I'd lie awake and hear echoes the sound of glass shattering, the scrape of a knife on the counter, Caitlin's voice whispering promises of revenge, and I'd wonder if true peace was even possible after something like this. But then Susan would tiptoe into my room, curl up beside me, and fall asleep with her little hand gripping mine, and I'd realize peace doesn't come all at once. It comes in fragments. In moments, and for now, those moments were enough. Months passed. Slowly, life began to stitch itself back together. The kids laughed more often. Susan joined the school choir, Harry learned how to ride his bike without training wheels. Emily and I finally went on a quiet dinner date, the first in what felt like years. For the first time, our lives weren't dictated by fear. At least, that's what I told myself. One Saturday morning, I was flipping pancakes when my phone buzzed. It was Detective Alvarez. His voice was calm, measured, but it carried a weight that froze me in place. "Caitlin's been transferred," he said. "Transferred? To where?" "State psychiatric facility. She was deemed unfit for standard incarceration after repeated incidents." My grip tightened on the phone. "Incidents?" Alvarez hesitated. "She attacked another inmate. And she's been writing letters. A lot of them. None reached you because of restrictions. But," he paused. "But what?" I pressed. "She talks about you. The kids. About coming back." I sank into a chair. The smell of pancakes suddenly nauseating. Emily walked in, sensing something was wrong. I didn't want to say it in front of the kids, so I mouthed, "It's about her." Her face went pale. That night, after the kids were asleep, I told Emily everything. She sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, silent as I explained. When I finished, she whispered, "So even locked away, she still finds a way to reach us." I nodded. "She's not here physically, but she's here. In our thoughts. Our fears. That's how people like her survive, they linger." For days afterward, I found myself glancing at shadows again. Checking locks twice. Peering out the window before letting the kids play in the yard. Rationally, I knew Caitlin was confined, guarded, monitored. But reason didn't stop the unease crawling under my skin. Because Alvarez was right, she still wrote about us. Still dreamed of us. And if there was one thing I learned, it was that Caitlin never let go of an obsession. One evening, Susan asked me out of nowhere, "Daddy, is Mommy thinking about us?" The question cut through me like a blade. I wanted to say no, to shield her from the truth. But lying felt wrong. "So," I said, softly, "yes, she is. But we're safe now. And that's what matters." Susan looked down at her hands, then whispered, "I don't want her to think about me." Neither did I. That night, long after everyone was asleep, I stood by the window, staring into the dark yard. Caitlin was miles away, locked behind walls she couldn't escape, and yet, I swear I could almost feel her watching, the echo of her presence, the reminder that some ghosts don't need to be near to haunt you.